true. It's been a year and a half of constant change, and there's going to be more to come. So what does strategic planning mean? How do you stick to a strategic plan when everything around you is changing? How do you make use of a multi-year strategic plan in a time of flux? Today on Coffee Time with Masterminds, we are going to be talking about flexing the strategic plan. I am Peta Blakely. I am the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Cynthia Rojas of To Your Growth and Rebecca Tuttle of Grant Right Now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Peter. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi.
And if you are joining us live, please write in the comments your name and where you're joining us from. So, Cynthia, you work with a lot of organizations on strategic planning processes.
Yep.
How are they thinking about strategic planning right now? Are people doing strategic planning? Or are people using strategic plans? What are the issues at a time like this?
Yeah, so this has been really interesting. Thank you for asking. So we're seeing a couple of different things. People who wanted to do a plan right before or right when the pandemic hit, put those on pause. As we started to see that the pandemic was running a little bit longer than we thought, and we're never going to go back to the way things were, now we're seeing an influx of people saying, oh, we really need to do this now. So now there feels like an urgency to it all. But also there are people who had a new plan, right? And then the pandemic hit and came back and said, we need to reevaluate this. So we're seeing this in a couple of ways. I'm also seeing that some organizations are experiencing growth, or I should say, those that are experiencing growth realize that they need a plan fast.
Yeah, right. That's the same in my world too.
we tend to assume it's a crisis time that everybody is in like shrink
right
and move backward mode, but that is not the case.
That is not the case.
Not in my field, because right now what's happening is there's more expenses like PPE and safe reopenings and modifying your services if you had to go online. So it's kind of interesting how some areas it's going back and then some it's moving forward at a rapid pace.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. A lot of hybrids, people wanting to look at programming from a hybrid perspective. Can we keep some staff at home, do some things remotely, but also move forward to planning to go in person? So yeah.
That is an interesting case where I think some program managers get confused about how they can apply performance metrics that they had in a given plan to a new model, right? Oh, yeah. And they'll say like, oh, well, we don't do this anymore, so those measures don't apply, right? And the way I see it is your higher level measures should apply. There are probably some particular outputs that are going to change and adjust. But if your outcome measures were very well mission aligned, they should still be relevant right now, right?
Right.
You should be serving the same mission, even if you're doing it like a slightly different mode. So we're going to measure attendance in a different way because people are logging on instead of coming. But are we reaching who we need to reach, and are they getting what they need to get? Those measures should stay the same.
So I think you just gave a great example of we're measuring outcomes, not necessarily our mission. Our mission exists so that it's in place so that we can get to those intended outcomes. But I really like what you said there, Pete. I think you just gave the answer away.
Sorry, go ahead, Cynthia.
Like the long division problem that Peter was doing right before the show, and we had a youngster needing to do a math problem, and Peter was like, "Oh, that's the answer." You're like the Oprah of answers. You get an answer.
Thinking a couple steps ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's something that when I'm working with programs and organizations, I'm trying to help them look a little bit further out. There is a very strong tendency to focus on output measures. which they have a place even in a time like this where a lot of things are changing. But those output measures should be very, very, very closely tied with mission and values. They shouldn't really change, right? If this is what your program is and does, then that's right, that's who you're reaching and that's how you're serving them, even at a time like this, right? Even when the particular modes of delivery might be changing.
And I love what you're saying, Peter, because it's true. Organizations should not approach this as, oh my God, we got to throw this away, right? But what you're saying is so valid. Your big strategic goals should not change because they're attached to your mission. What
Correct.
might change is your output or your tactics, right? How
Yes.
you go about the work. But your
Right.
strategy should still, so I'm thinking about workforce development, right?
Mhm.
There are a lot of organizations still providing that programming. How it looks today is different than what it looked like last year or 2 years ago,
Yep.
right? But it's still a workforce development program with
Right.
outputs, right?
Right. Right. And this would be a really good time to help everybody, especially help me, understand the difference between strategy and tactic.
Yeah.
And then let's unpack like where does that connect with a measurement process?
Yeah, I think I'll go first, but it looks like Rebecca's responding to some comments. Do we have comments, Rebecca?
Well, we have a couple of Facebook users. It doesn't say their name, but it says
Okay.
Facebook users that are joining us from the Data Informed Program group and our
great.
Facebook pages. So I was just saying good morning and let us know where you're from.
Yay, yay. We
Good
love
to
that
see you.
data informed group. If you are not in that group, you are not in.
Jump in.
We love that group. That is led by our very own Peter Blakely. So, tactics and strategies. I'll go for, well, Rebecca, do you want to answer that?
Well, I'm just thinking as I'm listening, this is a time where we're really testing our mission, that the strategies we had in place to meet our mission before, they've pivoted, right? The topic of the show today.
Yeah.
And it allows people to figure out new tactics to meet the same mission, just in a different capacity. So that's the way I look at it. It's a real test of, do you understand what your mission and calling really truly is? And are you still practicing those same values even when the work gets tough and tougher? And that's what I'm finding with my clients a lot, is that gone are the days of the continuity of the same funding for the same programs. You have to think outside that funding, and it's gotten a lot more competitive. So you have to answer that strategy versus tactic piece in order to stay competitive in the funding arena.
Yeah, I see the strategy, strategies or strategic plans, they have several components to them, right? So you have the big overarching goal, it guides where you're going, it really cements your values. And the tactics are almost how you're going to get there. So again, the goals may be the same. We want to ensure that people get jobs or, increase their hourly wages. That could remain the same. How you go about that, your tactic, is what's changing in this.
And I would argue, even on a good day, even in a relatively stable environment compared to right now, that organizations need to be more flexible than they usually are about their tactics. That organizations can get a little bit too attached to the activities in their program.
Yeah.
And take their eye off the why do we do that, right? If you are a health program, then it's easier to understand yourself as we're promoting health by having young people play soccer, right? When you understand that, it's pretty easy to give up soccer and take up basketball, right? If you think about yourself as a soccer program, there's a lot of confusion when you have to make a pivot, right? So it's actually easier when you got your eye a little bit further ahead. And how I look at using measures in that is to say, there are a lot of paths. There are a lot of potential paths to that one really important goal, like you phrased it, Cynthia. And so we should be constantly monitoring, are we on track towards this goal, given the situation, right? Are we on track right now? So on trackness might look different this year than it did in previous years, but you still have a responsibility to say you are or are not hitting this target, right? You are or not doing as well as can be expected in this circumstance. And to think like, so what are the other opportunities? How could we do even better, even given the circumstance? So, pivoting to like creating an online course or pivoting to creating a nutrition program or something like that is on brand and is going to keep you meeting those longer term outcomes.
I love that. I think when I talk to clients, I'm going to invite you in the call. It's so inspiring. It's inspiring to hear you speak because so many of us are stuck. Like, oh my, we're still stuck in the oh my. And so what you're saying is that there really is. I love the example of if it's about wellness, then you can go from soccer to basketball. But if you're a soccer program, then it starts to limit and put you in the box. I'm sorry, Rebecca.
That's okay. I'm writing it down so that I don't forget my
thoughts. I love it.
So I was just thinking, there's so many things going through my mind. Today, we're talking about the importance of pivoting and strategic planning. And I'm thinking, gosh, we're answering the answers we're trying to give today. Yeah. And I love when that happens because it causes your reader in grant writing or fund development not to have to think about what do you mean, but just, oh, okay, I can see that happening. So the things that are going through my mind right now are, we had a whole episode before about speaking to people's fears. Peter, you're talking about the need to do things differently, but that's okay. And here's a new opportunity to shift and to pivot those implementation pieces. And all of what we're talking about is supportive of the exact reason why we need a plan, right? And why it's so important to include other people in that planning process to lower that risk of fear, lower the risk of, fragmented implementation. I love this. This is really all encompassing of quite a few of our recent episodes.
Yeah. I think like one of the sources of fear there is people say, oh, I don't want to go back to the funder and say we're not doing that thing we said we would do. Do you find like that's a fear when people are making a pivot, is talking to funders and talking to other allies?
I think it's a fear if they're not confident in what they're shifting to, and if they're not prepared to speak to that funder about it. Mm-hmm. I am always of the mindset that you should reach out and have dialogue with your funders and never just submit and guess, because that could, result in a no, or it could make the funder say, this isn't really where they've been coming from historically with their work. Why are they doing this all of a sudden? Do they have a plan? So if you speak with them in advance and do that sort of pre-screen of the plan, then when you do submit, attach the plan with the application. And it will be, it'll raise your chances of being supported.
And again, using that organized strategic thinking to document the plan, right? Mm-hmm. If you can demonstrate that thinking, we had a target of X and we didn't achieve it because of Y barrier, like, we could not physically meet in the classroom and do the thing we usually do, right? And therefore we found this other path to meet that same outcome. I think if you can document that thinking really clearly, then it's an easy story to tell, right?
Absolutely. I just want to welcome Gemma, and we have a comment here.
Oh, great.
Let's see. The comment says, how can I keep on track in COVID-19 when everything changes, especially in terms of data collection and monitoring and evaluation planning to measure outcomes and impart indicators?
There's a lot there. So there's the, in terms of the actual methods of data collection, everything changes. Sometimes the measures themselves do. So we've been doing things like surveys that would have been some kind of face-to-face data collection have to go online, right? Have to be electronic. Realizing that now that creates a real barrier to people that like don't have internet access and other tools like that. So depending on what kind of place, right, your program is running in, you might have to do things like drop boxes for surveys and things like that, where people could do something, but not sitting down with an interviewer. Some people have found tremendous advantages to doing interviews and focus groups over Zoom, or Google, where people have the internet access to do it. It turns out it's kind of easier for the participants, and there's like a certain amount of relaxation that comes from the fact that the interviewer came to their house as opposed to them showing up for the interview. But then other elements, like you're right, you cannot measure an activity that you didn't do. So, right, so you just document like this target wasn't met, and here is why, right? Here are the obstacles, and here are the workarounds that we put in place, right? Here are the other services that happened. And at a time like this, a big part of your role in evaluation is documenting the adaptations as they change.
I love that.
So that at some point in the future, you can go back and review them all and say, like, which of these actually turned out to be good innovations that we want to do forever? Because there is no going back to pre-COVID. So do not think that your program 2 years from now is just magically going to be what it was in 2019. It's going to be the new hybrid 2022, 2023 program. It's going to be something completely different. And so what you want is a paper trail of, here was our thinking at that time. Here's the mini experiment that we ran. Here's how it did or did not help us reach those targets. Here's what part of that experiment we're going to keep and move forward.
I want to touch on that though, Peter, because you're saying that there's no going back. I'm sorry, Cynthia.
Yeah.
But the need that people had prior to the pandemic still exists. So now you've gone from this, responding to an unmet need or significant unmet need already with limited resources. Now you layer a pandemic on top of that. We have almost gone into this heightened velocity of need, and the resources now have to catch up on that. And anytime you find yourself wanting to just be tempted to write NA, right, not applicable, you need an answer there. You need an answer, and you need a strategy, and that's why, again, you need a plan.
You are not off the hook for showing up for the community that you serve.
Right. I love that sentence. Repeat that, Peter.
You are not off the hook for showing up for the community that you serve.
Right.
You got to be creative about how you get there. Right. Remember a few months ago, we talked with Renee, and she was talking about serving families in her neighborhood. And at the beginning of COVID, the most important thing that she could do to show up for that community was to make sure that kids and parents had the technology and the know-how that they needed to access online schooling. So it was a complete change and pivot in her tactic. But she still had her eye on the broader mission of reducing stress in households and making sure that families in her community could access the resources that they need.
I was actually thinking of her. She is a great example of someone who kept true to the overall mission, which is serving families, and she actually did a huge pivot.
Yeah.
Right. But she did it quickly. She had the backing of her board, and because she knew, and it's what you said, and I wrote it down, she was not off the hook.
No, no, you don't say this is too hard, we're not doing it.
Yeah. She totally embraced, like, oh my, what are we gonna do? And she focused on the user's needs, right? The individuals that she's serving. And I think when you talk about documentation, and I love every time you talk about it, is I can only imagine what a conversation with a funder would be if we teach funders, because funders also could use this learning, but if we talk to them about how the pandemic presented in an invitation to be creative, right? And look at everything from the user's standpoint versus what we can do.
Yeah.
So that's a slight shift in how we approach the strategy. A lot of people do that in the private sector, especially people that do, I mean, the Pepsi Colas of the world. I have no idea why that came in my mind. They're constantly, Apple products are constantly thinking about their user experience, right? And how users need to use things. And I think that's exactly what Renee did. And it's a great example. It's a great example.
Can I just put a plug in for Promoting Conflict Resolution Inc. right now? They just launched a fundraiser. They're putting together COVID bags for homeless populations in Boston. So there'll be hand sanitizer in there, a whole bunch of masks and other supplies. So if it's okay with you girls, I'd like to put the website in the comments, because if anyone wants to participate in that, that would be great.
That would be fantastic. Thanks.
We also have a comment here, and I'm not sure what FGD stands for. So hopefully our commenter will clarify, but here we go. It says, we, for instance, had a pre-test and a post-test to measure the impact, but after the pandemic cannot reach out to those clients. We conducted a pre-test, so the alternative is FGD online with anyone who gets the service. Let's see, there's a new comment here, so perhaps, oh, here we go. Here's the rest of it. Because the pre and post test was one of the donor's requirements to measure the impact indicator. They like the answer. Oh, she likes the answer.
Not off the hook.
Indeed, not off the hook, right.
Yeah,
but
right. So you have an evaluation plan, and you've told the donor, we're going to distribute a survey at time point A and time point B. So, and now you realize like your participants have scattered, and you don't know how to get them. So, so first, to tell your funder right away what's going on. Although, in the spring of 2020, I think like funders got it. Everybody knew. Survey anybody that you can. Right. Anybody that you can still find. Focus group discussion. Thank you. Yeah, you could do a focus group discussion. You could do a phone survey. If the folks that you're serving have telephones, and you have the staff to call them up and ask the questions. And if it's not super inappropriate to ask them those questions on the phone, you could, assuming that this is like in a geography where people might be able to access the survey, can you text or email people and ask them to come get a survey from a box and then drop it in another box? Can you distribute your post survey by text message? Obviously, you're going to lose some people because they're all, they're all stressed and distracted too. It's not going to be ideal, but you're going to collect what you can and then infer what you can from those results.
I want to add something there. I'm starting to get surveys by text, which I think is a great idea. I don't know what that costs and what it entails, but when you said, Peter, using text messaging, that's the first thing I thought about, and it's really easy, and it's usually done by like big companies like AT&T, Comcast, and stuff. But this thing about pre and post test, I have run into this problem a lot, and the whole purpose of those tests are to see change over time. When you don't have that luxury of doing pre and post or getting your sample big enough to really do a really good analysis, what I have found is that you could do a one point in time and ask people, did you increase, let's say this is about skills, did you increase your skills? And if the answer is yes, ask them 3 ways that they increase, or 4 ways. The number doesn't matter. But asking them how their skills changed, I think, is a bit more than a self-report. It gives you the element of change over time.
Yeah, that is a really great way to approach it. You can also ask people if you're only distributing a survey at the post, at the end of the time period, you can ask people to reflect back on their situation at the beginning. So you can say, thinking back to before you did X, how confident did you feel about such and such? And then now, how confident do you feel about such and such? And so you can get them to, fill in their pre and their post at the same time. Now, that doesn't help you if you had a school year program last year, right, where you lost your post. I had one program where we just rushed. Schools were closing and we just distributed as many surveys as we possibly could. Even though that meant obviously we were collecting data early and the program hadn't had time to run its full course, but we just anticipated that we were going to lose a lot of participants, due to all just the uncertainty and change. So we just rushed and did it early. And then we extended data collection a whole second year. I mean, this is back in the summer of 2020 when we thought that academic year 2021 was going to be like normal. So in our naivete, we just told the funder we'll do it again next year. Which
I remember those days.
Yeah, right.
I think though, this is important to note because if you have measures that you're trying to capture, especially with a funder, and then you just abandon that capture, you first have to explain that to a funder. They were very forgiving and they still are very forgiving. I had quite a few proposals where they just ergo the reports in their entirety and said focus on the service and the being a provider. But you have to be very careful because if you just abandon what you say this grant's outcomes you anticipate them being and you don't fill in the blanks with something else, how did you use the rest of that funding? You still owe the funder some information, even if you can't capture what you said you would. So I think you're not getting off the hook, right? You still, and this is good, but this is good practice for people who aren't used to implementing these types of things, right?
And you can still do your analysis even with that limited data or with a change data collection plan.
Absolutely.
I think, I think we tend to think like too dichotomously about data collection, like either it's scientifically rigorous or it's nothing. And I disagree. Say you are aiming for a sample of 100 and you got a sample of 5. It still take some time and analyze that data, right? Let's just assume that they were headed in the general direction as the rest of the population, right? And work with it. And then let's also actually do the thought exercise of examining our data in the context. So for example, in that program that I was just talking about, we were looking at academic engagement. So at the end of, school year 2020, kids were not very academically engaged. they were academically confused, disoriented, right? Yeah, so, we still took that data and we said, well, what have we done here? Like, do we think in the absence of our program that it might be worse? Right? Do we think that our program helps to stabilize their academic engagement in any way by providing some kind of continuity? And so that was the context in which we analyzed the data. And now we can still make productive use of it and say, like, given that, what other questions do we want to ask next year? So we added some questions to our focus group protocols for the following year. I don't want to say that we relaxed our standards, but we gave ourselves some grace about not hitting our target, given the situation, right? And then having all agreed it's not our fault, it was a global pandemic, we were able to write and think cogently about what does it mean to run this program and what does it look like to support academic engagement when kids can't go to school.
I love it. And Peter, you have a really positive way of looking at data, and I love that you use the word grace as you talk about data. It really it's because it's so intimidating for people. And what you're saying is, one, funders are your partners. but also there are many ways to achieve getting the data you want to get, right? And
Right.
that there's not just one way.
Right.
All
Right.
right.
And just because you're not sticking to your plan does not mean all is
Right.
lost.
It's not failure, it's innovation.
That's right.
Plus, we fail forward around here anyway.
We
You
So.
fail forward.
You're
Yes,
inventing new survey methods. So
you are.
Yeah.
You are. All right. I think we're almost done.
we're done. So if you have been watching, please leave your big takeaways in the comments. Cynthia, what was your big takeaway from today's show?
Oh my God. It's what you said. You're not off the hook for the community you serve and really honoring that. That's my big takeaway. Thank you for that.
Rebecca?
Mine is just write the pivots into the plan. And if you don't have a plan, use the pivots to develop the plan.
I love
Don't fear the plan.
Don't
Yeah, I remember several months ago, Rebecca, you and I were talking about logic models, and you were like, it's okay to be messy. You know, like a good logic model has comments in the margins and notes and, you know, and this is the perfect example of that. Like with the intention of showing up for the communities that we serve and keeping our eye on our mission, we are going to make some active and sometimes messy adaptations to the plan. So the best that we can do is document them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. All right, everyone. Well, thank you. Have a great weekend. And we'll see you next week in the last of the 4-part series on pivoting. Next week, we're talking about budgets, pivoting your budget.
Have
All
a great
right.
weekend, everybody. And
Bye.
happy New Year for those that observe.
Yes, happy Easter.